welcome to Washington. Well, let's welcome you properly. We are. We are. We are. Thank you. That's more like it. My name is Jeff Ballou, Penn State class of 1990. I am a proud graduate of the Belisario College of Communications, and I am a past president of this wonderful institution, the National Press Club. So I'm, on behalf of my successor, 5 times removed, Jen Judson, and the Board of Governors and the staff of the National Press Club, welcome you to this wonderful historic edifice. You are in the Frank Holman Lounge, and there's a wonderful story behind every part of this club has a story. But the story behind this room, and I'll be brief, is this. Frank Holman worked for a small newspaper in Watertown, New York. And this, just about between 1950 and 1955, discussions were beginning to happen about integrating the club. It was all white, all male, and it was not a pretty picture to try to make that argument. In fact, it failed several times. But Frank Holman, who was president of the club at the time, took the reins and artfully steered it through, making Louis Laudier in 1955 the first African-American member of the National Press Club. And the year after that, Simeon Booker, who broke the Emmett Till story, the second African-American member of the National Press Club. The minutes of those meetings hung in the president's office during my term on purpose. And during my inauguration, Simeon Booker, who was still alive at the time, held my late mother's Bible while I was sworn in the ballroom next door. So I sent a very loud signal that I know whose shoulders I stood upon. And many of you, some of you in this room, have some wonderful direct connections to me as Penn Staters. And I was talking with my good friend, Brian Healy, seated over to my left, your right, who came to my news media ethics class when I was a senior and spoke to us about trying to navigate our professional life. And he's always been a warm and encouraging soul and very realistic soul. There was no, as the saying, no cut cards there. You got a straight truth, and I've always appreciated his wisdom, his candor, his humor, and his support all these 30-odd years that I've been in this business. And so thank you, Brian. It's always good to give people their flowers in person. And speaking of generations, watching him, because he was a longtime senior producer for CBS News, talking to another alum and State College native and current Washington Bureau Chief of CBS News, Mark Lima, is sitting in the back. Wave your hand, Mark. And trading war stories of how he can survive since he's barely 6 months in the job. And that's what this is about, making those connections and building those things. Now, here at the National Press Club, one small public service announcement, you'll probably notice that there was a giant clock in the hallway. And for those of you who are watching on camera, there is a flat screen with the picture of Austin Tice. Austin Tice is a former Marine, he's a journalist, and he's been captive in Syria for 9 years and 277 days and counting. So we have worked for years to bring him home. Like before that, we worked to bring home Jason Rezaian of the Washington Post and all journalists that are in harm and danger. And we just, not celebrated, but we just observed a moment of silence in the past couple of days in the horrific, well, I can't put it any nicer, assassination of my colleague. I work for Al Jazeera as a news editor, Shireen I mean, and she was just doing her job. She had a press vest on, loud as a stoplight, a helmet on, and she was shot cold, dead in the neck. So we stand for press freedom in this institution and spoke out about that. I spoke out about my term. My predecessors have done it. My successors continue to do it. That's what we're about here. And in the Bart Richards Media Criticism Award tonight, to that point, to that we focus on things and that are in the news. You know, you've had a lot of mass shootings that have happened, particularly the horrific one in Buffalo. And part of the discussion in social media and elsewhere will be, how do we cover these stories? How do we frame the shooter? There's a hot debate about that. Do you call him a white supremacist or not? Do you call this a racist act or not? In journalism, we focus on one very basic thing, the truth. Call a thing a thing. I did it, my predecessors do it, my successors are doing it, and all of you who are in the profession, I hope, are doing it. And I am pleased that we will be honoring the Marshall Project, and I was talking with Lawrence before I got started. My good friend, Ebony Reed, works for the Marshall Project, and I informed Lawrence and his colleagues about the notion that this will be the second time within a year that the Marshall Project has been honored in this building. The highest award we honor people with, colleagues with at the National Press Club is the Fourth Estate Award. And one of the awards went to the Marshall Project. And Susan Chira and others on the staff were honored. And Susan Chira, and as I told Lawrence, profiled my late mother when she was at the New York Times, and she was a lifetime, worked at a lifetime as a nurse, and wrote a story about the healthcare system. And the joke between my mother and I at the time was, you made the New York Times before I could get my first job in journalism. So, but I don't want to take up too much time on this microphone. I want to get the party started and get to the honors. I believe I'll be introducing my good friend and wonderful captain of the ship of state. And I use the word state, of course, deliberately because of Penn State, of the Belisario College of Communications, who has done so many wonderful things since assuming the helm, including opening, if you haven't seen it yet, a fabulous media center. And I was privileged that Marie took me on the tour of the building, and it's just a wonderful achievement. But it's more than the bricks and mortar. It's the academics, it's the people. And she's proven to be a wonderful leader of all of those things. So with that, please welcome to the podium the Dean of the Belisario College of Communications at the Pennsylvania State University, Marie Harton. Cheers.
Thank you, Jeff. And I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I especially want to thank the Belisario staff, Paris and Steve and Mike and George, who came over, who traveled over for this. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I mean, isn't it nice to do more than click on a Zoom link for a change? So it's great to see alumni and friends across the decades. And we do have such a wonderful array of alumni, and I especially want to welcome Marty Aronoff, a 1960 graduate. He's been a pioneer in sports broadcasting, so we're always happy to have Marty with us. I think, Paris, do we have a video about with some highlights from the past year? Let's take a look at that, and then we'll talk a little bit.
This is an experience that normally wasn't achieved until after you graduated.
Team USA Soccer.
Yes?
Yes is the correct answer.
Hello everyone, I'm Caitlin Gelhaus, one of the Penn Staters who was able to come out to California to cover the Super Bowl.
And it's closer, I think, to see the future. I would do that. I would do that. That's my opinion. Eric would probably say it.
A nice little tour through our year. And what you saw from that, I think, is, we had an incredibly busy year as we all came back together fully for in-person classes. We mourned the loss of a beloved faculty member, Kurt Chandler, but we also had the opportunity to celebrate a lot of growth in the college and our students and growing our impact. Returning to in-person, you saw what, all the things our students were able to get involved in. We sent an international reporting class to Scotland, and they all came back, by the way. No problems there. We continued our excellence with things like, with our student media organizations like Center County Report, which won America's Best Student Newscast from the Broadcast Education Association this year for the third time. Very excited about that. And lots of individual accomplishments by students, including the Hearst Journalism Foundation's National Championship is next week. And again, we have a student competing in that national championship, so that's just absolutely terrific. 685 students of ours graduated, walked across the stage for an in-person commencement ceremony on Saturday. That was just actually a little bit more than a week ago, and the BJC. And so that was a wonderful, wonderful event for those students. And I just want to thank you all. Many of you in the room, including Jeff, support our students. You do it financially, but you also do it with your mentoring, and you also do it with your interest in our students, and that means so very, very much, and I want to thank you for that. Now, as you saw, Jeff mentioned it, and it's also on the video. You saw the headline clearly for the Belisario College this year clearly was the opening of the Media Center. Some of you have been there. If you haven't, I hope you'll get a chance to come to campus. Our students have really claimed it as their own. They've claimed it as their home, and they really see this as a destination. What I keep saying to the students and what I keep talking about in terms of the college is this is not a destination for us. It's a launch pad. It's a launch pad for us. We have so much great potential that we can now use that media center to leverage. Here's one example, and this would pertain to what we're talking about tonight, and that is thinking about teaching and practicing journalism in much more powerful ways that serve the Commonwealth and water some of those news deserts throughout Pennsylvania. And that's a goal of ours in the center. And we've hired Maggie Messett. She was, just for a second there, you saw her in the video. She was founding director of Report for America. She's now editorial director of our newsroom. And wow, is she zooming ahead with her plans to do exactly what I just talked about. I think as we do that, and I want to just mention this because I think it's so important, we will be underscoring for our students the relationship between journalism and democracy. And that's increasingly important, I think. And I also think that it's not a lesson we should take for granted. We have to be intentional about helping our students understand that very, very important relationship. And that, of course, leads to this award. Leads to the idea of democracy in journalism, and making sure that we support quality journalism is very much embedded in this award. So the Bart Richards Award for Media Criticism recognizes distinguished contributions to the improvement of journalism through responsible analysis. This award was created in 1994 by George and Ann Richards to honor George's father, Bart, who was a longtime Pennsylvania newspaper editor. And I can remember there were times, and I know some of our other folks in the room can remember when George would join us at these events. And it was wonderful to hear his stories about his dad. Throughout the years, wow, have we had some terrific winners of this award. Neiman Reports, On the Media, The Washington Post's Paul Farhi and Margaret Sullivan, NPR's David Folkenflik, CNN's Brian Stelter, and more. And tonight, we add a new name to that list, and that's very exciting. Now, as you know, the entries come in, we vet those entries among the faculty, and then we pass along sort of the top contenders to some judges that are really highly qualified with their experience and expertise to judge and help us make that final decision. And two of those judges are with us tonight, so I want to mention them and thank them. Andy Alexander is a visiting professional at Ohio University. Yeah, let's give Andy a hand. He is a visiting professional at Ohio University, and immediately before that had a long career at the Washington Post, including as ombudsman, and has some great stories about that time that he was telling us earlier. Another judge, Terry Muchler. Terry? You all know Terry is one of our alumni. What you may not know about her is she is our most recent inductee as an alumni fellow at Penn State. So her name is now, if you go in Hintz Alumni Center, her name is forever on the wall there, which is pretty darn cool. So a longtime journalist and expert on transparency and public data, which again, I would argue is so relevant for the times that we're living in and so important. The other judge who's not here tonight, I want to mention him, Sam Fullwood, who is Dean of the School of Journalism at American University, and right before that was Vice President and Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. So quite an all-star lineup of judges. And their choice, and you're going to see why in just a minute, is the Marshall Project. The particular initiative you're going to learn about tonight goes to the heart of the discipline of journalism and has the potential for broad impact in how we think about millions of Americans and the criminal justice system. It's a combination of reporting and instruction for journalists, and I think that is ideal for this award. So let's watch this short video that includes interviews with members of the winning team. You're going to hear from Susan Chira and Akiba Solomon, and then I'll be back up for just a minute.
I think that what has been singular for me about the Marshall Project is because it is nonprofit, we do not have to worry about persuading readers to pay to access our site. Therefore, we can and do try to reach audiences that for-profit journalism does not necessarily center on, and that includes people who are incarcerated and their families and people whose lives become entangled in the criminal justice system. And so it's that ability to reach directly and think about how best to provide information to people who wouldn't necessarily turn to the large for-profit news outlets for their information because they'd need to pay. And in our case, we offer it free. We wrestle all the time with what language do we use to refer to people who get caught up in the system, and what language is dehumanizing, and what language is does not put people first, as we said. It does not remind our readers that the people we write about are people, however flawed or however challenged. It's special to us in a lot of ways, because I think what I love is that we're trying to think about a language, about what language does, and we're trying to at once honor the fact that language can be used deliberately, almost as a weapon. I mean, one of the things that came out of our discussions with people who are incarcerated in some of the essays is the way that some of the terms that a lot of journalistic organizations assume are neutral descriptors actually are used to demean people. You know, if correctional officers are barking commands at people and they use some of these terms, it's really almost like a slur, and it's deliberately made to humiliate. And so I think that in thinking about how to try to avoid terms that demean people, but also, as Akiba wrote beautifully, journalism is a discipline of clarity. So we can't always use language that some advocacy groups would prefer because it's not clear.
I mean, I think the Marshall Project has done series of essays and has told twos in the past, but what was different with this one is that it combined personal essay, interview, as told to, and the style guidelines. And so I don't think we've ever done a project that includes a style advisory. So I think that's what's different. What I expected personally was that we would just all get on one page at the Marshall Project, and that the examples in the advisory might help journalists from outside the Marshall Project work around this concept. And so it was really important to include examples, you know, rather than just tell people we're following the logic of people first language. You know, I wanted to show some constructions that journalists can easily reference in their own work, because we all know when you're on deadline, you're not trying to struggle with, you know, a word soup. So you need like ready-made phrases to go to. So I expected that to connect with people. I didn't expect other publications necessarily to change their style, but definitely wanted to be an example, I think, in how to do this. This project was special because we enlisted the staff to give feedback. People were invested in the project. And I also think because the project was somewhat novel, we got feedback from people that we wouldn't get feedback from before. So in that way, you know, I felt proud of the work. I felt like, you know, what I intended to do with it, and how my colleagues and I work together. And I want to mention Lawrence Bartley. I also want to mention Katie Park, who is the developer on the project, and Bowan Coombe, who is the designer. We also had a former intern, Adria Watson, write something. We had one of our staff writers, Will Cooper, do an interview. And so given that this was sort of a collective effort, the response was also collective, and that's what made it special.
Are you intrigued? I hope you are, and I hope if you haven't gone to see this work, that you will go and take a close look at it. And I want to echo the words of Akiba on that video, and I want to mention Lawrence Bartley. He is with us here tonight, and he will be making comments on behalf of the Marshall Project. Lawrence.
Thank you. You're so kind. Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here to accept this award on behalf of the Marshall Project. And it's an equal honor to be one of the contributors to the Language Project. Unfortunately, besides being a journalist myself for quite a few years now, one of the things that qualified me to speak on this in a way that others couldn't is that I'm personally impacted by the justice system myself. And because of that, I know firsthand what it's like to be seen as less than, even when it comes at a time where I've done a 180 from the teenager I was that led me to get in trouble in the first place. I had earned a graduate degree while incarcerated, and my children looked at me as the best dad in the world, even while I was on the inside. And it's because largely it's in part because of the way I carried myself, and I carried myself as a person. So every time, we hear these descriptors and these labels like offender, inmate, convict, it's very demeaning to people. And it's very hurtful when I would hear it. One example, I remember reading a headline, and the headline said, "Convict walks the road to redemption." Now, thinking about that headline, I imagine that the reporter wrote that piece to highlight what the convict was doing. To give you an example, for instance, a convict could be a person who she's calling a convict, could be inside his, her, or their cell writing code with a pen and piece of paper, and that code is used to build the most interesting software that you could ever imagine. But when you call that person a convict, that kind of distracts from the message. It distracts from the clarity. So now you're not thinking about this amazing thing that this person produced. You're thinking about why that person is a convict. What did that person do to get there? So you're reverting that person back to the worst thing that person ever did, and reverting that person's family back to the same thing. And that's all they're thinking about. But when I began on this road of working with the Marshall Project, many of the advocates that work in the criminal justice space, they came to me and said, "Wow, you're the first formerly incarcerated person ever employed by the Marshall Project, a national news organization, which is the youngest to ever win a Pulitzer Prize. Cool, we love it. We love your work. But one thing we don't like is that the Marshall Project uses words like inmate in their reporting. And we hope that you could change that." Now, I'm not standing here to say that I single-handedly changed that, because I did not, but I played a part in it. And I give the lion's share of the credit to Akiva Solomon, who's our editor, who you just seen, and also Rasan Thomas, who is currently incarcerated in San Quentin. Some of you may have heard of the popular podcast, Ear Hustle. He's the host of Ear Hustle. And he's a journalist. He's also writes for the San Quentin News. And he would call Akiva, and he would be on her when she first started working. It's like, "Oh, maybe the project should take a stance on the words like inmate, convict, should take away from that, because it makes incarcerated people look bad when we aren't all bad. We've done some bad things, but we're not bad people." So when Akiva came on board, her and I would have these lengthy conversations about the words. I would also have conversations with my staff members, even before Akiva got on board, about how it makes incarcerated people feel, how it distracts from what we are doing. And when Akiva decided to manage this language project with a collection of different writings that she laid out to you, as told to me, reporting and personal essays, I would tell her that one thing that's important to note is that incarcerated people themselves should weigh in, because not only are they hurt by the words, but it's important to understand there are some words that they may be okay with, some words that they are not, but those words are not universal, they're regional. So with my department, News Inside and Inside Story, News Inside I'm the founder and director of that department under the Marshall Project. And in brief, I'll say about that is that our content is about criminal justice news, and it lives online primarily. But incarcerated people who are affected by the criminal justice system, they are not able to read our content because they don't have access to internet. So I created a print publication that is circulated in prisons and jails across the country in order to feed incarcerated people information, because prisons and jails is one of the biggest information deserts in the country because of the screening, because the stringent and subjective screening practices that a lot of content can't get into prisons and jails. And and to take it a step further, 3 out of 5 incarcerated people have literacy issues. So we created a video series called Inside Story in order to get news to incarcerated people as well. But in that work, we not only create news for incarcerated people, we also create it with them. So when we went down the road of creating a language project, I reached out to many of my contacts. We have built this resource of incarcerated people. And to give you an example of how powerful that is, we did a survey leading up to the 2020 presidential election to try to discover the political leanings of incarcerated people. And if you look at the traditional poll that you might see on the news, they have about 1,000 respondents. But for our political survey, we got over 8,000 respondents. That showed you how engaged incarcerated people were, because they were saying, wow, no one usually listens to us. People usually don't care about us. So you're asking us how we feel about the election, how we will vote, what issues are most important to us. And we were able to debunk a lot of myths about whether incarcerated people are solely left-leaning or right-leaning. We debunked a lot of myths about that, but I digress. But with having that type of resource and that level of engagement and communication with incarcerated people, I asked them about language, what would they prefer, what they don't like about words like offender, convict, prisoner, inmate. And we got varied responses from people in Mississippi, Ohio, California, New York, and the majority of them really had problems with the word inmate. They also had problems with the word offender. But some of them didn't have problems with the word prisoner, and they didn't have the problem with the word convict. What was interesting about that is that what those words represented to them was consistent, but their definitions would the definitions were consistent, but the word attached to the definition was different. The definition for convict was the same as the definition for prisoner. Convict, they like it preferably in the South, but in the North, they would prefer the word prisoner, but the definition was the same. So I came across a parable from a person who is not incarcerated anymore. He's formerly incarcerated, and his name is Jonathan Gittins. What he used to do, he used to work in a prison in a place called Orientation. And this is a place where when new incarcerated people come into a facility, he would stand in a room like this full of maybe 30 or 40 people every week and kind of orient them to the facility. What are the do's? What are the don'ts? Where are things located? How do you contact a counselor? How do you go on a visit? Where you use the phone? Where do you shower? Where do you exercise? And he also would kind of challenge their mind on who they wanted to be, what category would they want to fit into. And he would tell them this parable. And the parable is, there were 3 men inside of a mess hall. One person called himself a convict because he committed his crime, he was complicit in his crime, and he was all right with that. Another person called himself a prisoner, largely because of his political views. He felt that he didn't commit his crime. He went to trial. He said he was innocent. He got convicted, and now he spends his time living in the law library, scouring through logbooks, learning law, trying to appeal his case to overturn his conviction while helping others do the same and while helping others champion issues in the prison system they feel is unfair. The third person called himself an inmate. This person spent his time in the yard, playing cards, getting high, reading pornography books, and a lot of staff and incarcerated people view that person as a snitch or someone who likes his or her conditions. Now, A fourth person enters the conversation. This person's a newbie, just came into prison, and he asks the three men, how do you get the best out of your prison stay? And the convict says, well, just learn ways to commit better crimes. The, the prisoner says, well, learn ways to fight for people who can't fight for themselves and try to right the wrongs of the system. The inmate says, well, just go about, try to having a good time. So the newbie started scratching his head and said, is there anything you three agree on? And all of them said in unison, they said, yes, we are all incarcerated people. Now, the point is that they are people. They're not convicts. They're not inmates. They're not prisoners. So when you use words like that, you create stigmas, and you create stigmas that kind of leak into behaviors. So we try to stay away from doing that. And one of the fruits of the language project is that the Marshall Project changes guidance and how we describe people who are in prison. And we say that people in prison, incarcerated person, person detained. We use those type of words, and we kind of debunk the prevalent ideology that saying incarcerated person inside too many times in a paragraph sounds clunky, but there's ways to do it. It might be a little more challenging, but there's way to do it to kind of represent people fairly and uphold the clarity in journalism. So with that, I want to say thank you all for having me here, getting up here and talk about this beautiful work that I was lucky enough to be a part of. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions for Lawrence? He might be able to answer a question or two if anybody has them. Anybody? Got one right here. Come on up. Just for just a second, Lawrence.
Well, quite a few newsrooms reach out to us, and some of them had already began changing the way they refer to incarcerated people, and even went further. Like the Houston Chronicle, they won't show any pictures of any mugshots up there, because those live on forever on the internet. You catch a person at their bad moment. One of our staff writers called them the meth photos. Someone is high on meth, and they take a snapshot of the person, and that person 20 years later clean up, and then that lives forever. But there are states who actually change their laws, meaning the language of the law that has inmate in there, and they got rid of it, like New York. Not to say that they did it because of us, but they were already along that road, and we happen to be a part of that. But yes, there are a few media organizations, I can't recall them off the top of my head, but they've written to us and said they changed their guidance because of what we did. Thank you. Well, I think a lot more progress needs to be made. I think that our organization, right now, we have a formerly incarcerated woman on our board. We have a formerly incarcerated female writer, and we have three formerly incarcerated staff members, including myself. And our organization has 52 employees. So we're taking steps and we're hiring more. We're looking like we have someone we're gonna hire pretty soon. And I think the way that the doors open is by having journalism, whether it's TV journalism or text journalism, created by people who are formerly incarcerated, because many incarcerated people don't even apply for the job because they automatically assume that the door will be shut. And they don't apply for jobs in other sectors because they automatically assume the doors will be shut. But what we try to do, we have a section in News Inside and an Inside Story called In the Spotlight. We try to spotlight formerly incarcerated people who are doing things that people never expect that they can do. And it kind of opens the door to be inspiring to the incarcerated people who are still on the inside to come out and say, hey, wait, I might try that. And if we do good jobs, then people see it, and sometimes it gets the press, and then other news organizations might be apt to give people like myself a chance to show what we can do. I read the book many years ago when I was a much younger man, and I wish I would have met him. I wish I had the opportunity to meet him rather, but I haven't. But that would be great, and I definitely understand where he was going. Even now, sometimes I find myself, I say that, should I reveal whether I'm formally incarcerated or not? So I kind of choose the venue. The reason why I bring it up here because it's important to the work that I'm doing. But in other places where it makes no sense for me to say that, I wouldn't. And I also talk to our staff members who ask me about, should we say it or should we hide it? I kind of give them guidance on when they should and when they shouldn't. But it's a continuous struggle. So I know exactly where Mr. McCall was going.
All right, I'm gonna, Lori, do you have a question? Last question here,
Well, absolutely. Currently, and this is on a lower end, and I say this is as of maybe 6 months ago, we will receive over 120 pieces of mail a month, but it always increases every month. And we receive tons of emails. And right now, in prisons and jails, they have tablets, closed circuit tablets, is not connected to the internet, and they can message and email that way. So we receive tons of those, and and it might be some days where I'm tired from staying up all night and doing things with my kids, and I'm heading into work. And if I ever want to pick me up, we have in Slack, we have like a love notes channel, and someone on our staff kind of scans or or kind of takes out the parts of letters that kind of encourage us and say, oh, we love what you guys are doing. This is amazing. Or I use the language in one of your stories in order to perfect my legal brief, and I'm getting ready to be released because of it. Or I thought there was no hope. I thought I was never get a job, but because of you, Lawrence, I'm inspired to do this, and I'm going to go out there and do it. So we receive that all the time, and it kind of spurs us on to continue doing what we're doing.
Okay, one last question for you, Lawrence. Dean's prerogative here. Can you tell us what you hope happens as a result of this project that maybe hasn't happened yet, either for you or for the Marshall Project? or for, the many millions of folks out there who are impacted by your work.
Well, I hope that all news organizations stop using words like inmate and convict to describe people. It's been happening, but I hope more of it happens. I hope more states take that language out of their directives, policy and procedures, and laws. I hope to eradicate that kind of language and have people see people as people. I prefer them refer to incarcerated people by their names first and foremost, and to just give people a chance to be judged for their current character, not past behavior or who says that this is the way we should look at you, call you, or treat you, because I don't think it's right. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you all. So kind.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Have a great evening. Thank you.